Hi, my name is Ben DeDominicis. I'm a professor of political science in the International Studies Department here at the Catholic University of Korea, and I am privileged to participate in this climate change conference. I already uploaded a video, not a video, a PDF file, a virtual poster, and I thought I would also upload a link to a YouTube 20-minute presentation, this presentation of the virtual poster to make it as easy as possible to follow along with it. So let me share the screen and show you what I uploaded, and let me go through and talk about it for a few minutes. So the video poster is derived from a paper that is now in press entitled American Economic Nationalism, Corporatist, Neoliberal, and Neo-Corporatist Political Strategic Responses to Contemporary Global Systemic Crises. The paper is a political theory paper. I'm in political science, and it focuses on trying to conceptualize economic nationalism and its relationship to social movements using a theory of political psychology that focuses on the political psychology of nationalism as the analytical frame. And it highlights that in a world of intensifying global interdependency, which is becoming not only increasingly intense, but increasingly salient to more and more of the public, the national and global publics are responding through various responses, of course. And one response is intensifying hostility and in-group formation and expression against the increasing salience of interdependency, as evidenced in the collective political psychological processes of climate denial, pandemic denial, vaccine denial, manifesting basically the political psychology of nationalism and its tendency to engage in patterns of stereotyping, including, of course, what others have called selective forgetting or selective perception. The paper attempts to understand how, from a praxis point of view, political actors and leaders can attempt to respond and utilizing the established institutional capacities of the state, and particularly the nation state, within a contextual understanding of the history of the development of the nation state and its role in overcoming polarization to the extent it can overcome polarization within societies, because of course, some states have failed to overcome polarization. They've disintegrated. I have in mind multinational empires like the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian Empire, which became the Soviet Union but still disintegrated. As well, also the People's Republic of Yugoslavia, the communist Yugoslavia. So the political theory focus of the paper is upon trying to conceptualize neo-corporatism as a way by which to understand the role of the state in alleviating or undercutting polarization between societal constituencies that are locked in intensifying relationships of social competition. And the social identity theory is the social psychological framework that was utilized in terms of developing this theory of nationalism from Kadam and Kadam, 2001. You can see the reference at the bottom there: nationalism and politics, the political behavior of nation states. The foundational principles of that can be summarized pretty quickly. Firstly, human beings generally want to have a positive self-image. Secondly, they tend to self-identify within groups. And so their perception of the level of respect, dignity of that in-group within the societal context correlates with their own sense of self-identity and respect. And so consequently, if they evaluate their in-group self-identity negatively in comparison to another outgroup, they can respond in three different types of social identity management strategies. One is, as I just mentioned, social competition, whereby they engage in zero-sum competition to raise their own status at the expense of the outgroup with whom they compare themselves negatively. That's social competition. Social mobility is to join the higher esteemed outgroup, leave one's own in-group and assimilate into the outgroup. And social creativity is to change the evaluation criteria by which we compare the two groups, so that I shift my evaluation of my own in-group to a positive self-evaluation by compensating psychologically by raising or emphasizing other qualities to which my group is superior to the other group. And what is the role of the state typically in carrying out that process? I mean, one way to conceptualize the state is it provides opportunities for assimilation, for role functions, and generating loyalty and ensuring loyalty to the community. It also, in terms of developing the power capabilities of the state, it seeks to elaborate the institutions of society so that, as I mentioned, to alleviate polarization, which is destabilizing, can threaten the regime and the authorities who occupy at the pinnacle of that regime, and also to provide greater institutional complexity for developing the power capacities of the state in terms of more elaborate institutions and generation of capacities utilizing the power potential base of the state. And so and this is a point that I'm not incorporating as a new revelation. I argue that this process has been underway since on a global level since the early 20th century, with particularly as illustrated by the development of Keynesian macroeconomics. I mean, John Maynard Keynes' theories of macroeconomic, modern macroeconomic science understand or assume or explicit in their understanding about the relationship of interdependencies and comparative performance among national economies in terms of, for example, GDP, inflation rate, unemployment level, and also in terms of currency competitiveness, since the Bretton Woods system in particular broke down the evaluation of national economies in an interdependent context in terms of the relative value and changing values of the currencies in the era, particularly fiat currencies, since 1971 and the abolition of the Bretton Woods system, when the U.S. dollar was the foundation for the currencies as pegged to gold for the rest of the world's currencies. But and so this recognition of complex interdependency among nation states, in particular, motivates the nation states to extend their institutional function within society in order to respond to changing values within the constituencies of society, which reflect higher economic development capacities, educational achievements, greater security, Maslow's hierarchy of needs movement, also post-materialist values, as other researchers have highlighted, have grown more in intensity. And these are in response to and these generate social movements that aim to change the status and dignity positions of sectors of society that might be descriptively traditionally marginalized, like racial minorities, gender minorities, and to reinvigorate them and reintegrate them back into the state. And this is in a context of, as I mentioned, of increasing global complex interdependency. And this tendency is illustrating maybe a greater degree of harmonization among, in some sense, the developed nation states, if not a convergence of institutions, but there is a harmonization, as emphasized in the European integration literature, the distinction between Europeanization, convergence, and harmonization, that there's a certain degree of harmonization globally across the developed societies. And that you use the term harmonization because these societies, of course, have their path dependencies. And I emphasize or highlight in the paper the role of American path dependencies, given its foundation as a colonization immigrant society by European imperial empire expansion that expropriated the resources of the indigenous population and relied heavily on enslaved labor imported from Africa in particular to provide early commodities for international trade and commerce, tobacco, cotton, cane sugar, and the like, and that this is the foundational legacy institutionally of these immigrant societies in the Western Hemisphere. United States in the north, Brazil in the south, Bolsonaro in the south, Trump in the north, and over the generations that the state has intervened to attempt to ameliorate conflicts within society, within the broader context of the international competition. So, for example, as the civil rights movement intensified, after a hiatus during World War II, and then the victory over white Nazi Aryan nationalism headquartered in Germany. Of course, the civil rights movement demanding substantive equality and dignity for African Americans who are traditionally descriptively marginalized intensified, and of course the Cold War made that ascriptive marginalization even more of a problem for the United States, obviously because the Soviet Union is pointing to the way the Americans persecute, marginalize, lynch African American populations was a problem for a number of ways, including the competition for influence and prestige in the rest of the world, including the post-colonial world, and so and that's been highlighted in the literature about the role of the Cold War in that regard, and of course these dynamics are continuing in the post-Cold War world with the increasing pace of globalization, and so. But as I mentioned, the path dependencies of particular countries, of course, are going to be very significant in terms of determining how they respond to the challenges of globalization, complex interdependency, and social movements that are learning and borrowing and copying from each other by watching what others are doing abroad and incorporating it domestically. And of course, the American path dependency emphasizes its foundational principles under Protestant Congregationalist Congregationalist Calvinism, as Seymour Martin Lipset highlights in 1997 in his book American Exceptionalism: A Double-Edged Sword, and which has this traditional suspicion of the paternal state because it associates the noblesse oblige state, the aristocratic state of Europe, with the old church, because that was the justification for rule by the aristocracy and the king, the monarch, by having the state church. So by this rising middle class, using the symbols and articulations of religiosity and religious reform under, for example, John Locke, rejected the state church, and because of this rejection of aristocratic government and aristocratic hierarchy. And so the point others have made is that developing corporatist approaches to managing complex interdependency, in some ways, European and Asian states, East Asian states, have had an advantage in that regard because of their corporatist traditions, which they've inherited from their feudal aristocratic backgrounds with strong class divisions. I mean, Seymour Martin Lipset makes that point that the United States hasn't had a particularly strong socialist party because it doesn't have strong working class polarization identity. Most people think they're middle class in the U.S., for example. So how do the Americans engage or legitimate the process of state intervention in society? Typically, they do it, of course, in terms of national security. During the Cold War, state intervention in society, for example, through de facto industrial policies, which is now all, again, a topic of discussion these days. But in the past, there was a de facto industrial policy orchestrated through the Defense Department and NASA, and with obviously tremendous impacts, given the dominance, for example, until recently, the U.S. Aerospace industry and technology and computer and so on, and so. And that does reflect that Lockean notion that the best state is a night watchman state, but that state at point may need to mobilize a military to deal with evil bad guys externally. And of course, that evil bad guy was the Soviet Union. And now it appears, my concern is, of course, that with the end of the Soviet Union, but the development still, the continuing existence of the vast national security establishment in the United States that emerged during the Cold War, with vested interests in that Cold War infrastructure, the national security containment infrastructure, both in the public and also in the private sphere, as contractors supplying those state actors, instruments such as the Defense Department and other national security agencies, that of course they are prone to look for new reasons to exist and new justifications for budget allocations, and also, is reflected in the prevailing view that the United States won the Cold War against what was supposedly a Russian version of Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union. So the fact that the United States supposedly won that Cold War and saved humanity from what was portrayed as a Russian version, the Soviet Union as a Russian version of Nazi Germany, legitimates those institutions and their continued existence in American hegemony on the basis of them. And so we see this this intersection of these different trends in the last few minutes here coming together. Wolfers points out early in 2020 in a New York Times article about how, for example, during World War II, the American service men and women who were serving in the military were paid, and that pay, because it was paid by the U.S. government, was included in American GDP figures. And he is arguing at the beginning of the pandemic and the payments towards workers who are unemployed or on temporary on furlough because of the pandemic need for social distancing. He suggested that should be considered unemployment insurance should be considered payment for a national security service, that basically public health crisis services to contain the coronavirus. And I illustrate that in the paper in terms of how that shows how the state intervenes, the state's designation of social relations and social functions as designated through payment, through its ability to use fiat currency to subsidize those service performances, illustrates the role of the state in organizing societal constituencies to meet perceived national challenges within the context of complex global interdependency. And it's also manifest, for example, in the discussion about providing medical care, daycare services to increasing daycare services, so that the half of the population that is female, that much of that is disproportionately allocated responsibility for childcare, and of course that has put them at a great disadvantage during the pandemic and the so-called she session, since they're often forced to choose between continuing their careers and taking primary responsibility for childcare and education, at-home education, during the pandemic. So there's been calls for the state to intervene and to pay for daycare, pay for elder care. In other words, issue fiat currency, and that should be considered, therefore, part of the services production of the state, of the national economy, in its function within a global environment, whose interdependency has been starkly illustrated by the global pandemic, and is continuing to be starkly illustrated by the intensifying and multiplying social crises as a result of the impacts of global Anthropocene climate change. And so that summarizes basically the substance of the paper, and that the role of social movements, progressive social movements, looking at that from that perspective, should of course emphasize the exploitation of diaspora politics, particularly in the competition for the United States and China for influence in the so-called developing world, and the large diasporas of African diaspora in the world. For example, its function in continuing to push for the pluralization of the American state, and making that, and by creating more social creativity opportunities, so that there's greater social mobility opportunities for the individuals within those traditionally marginalized communities. And the state increasingly has the interest to do that within the context of competition and within complex interdependency with the rest of the world. So that pretty much summarizes my my presentation, and I apologize for the noise in the background here. You might hear these motorcycles and motor scooters. Korea has moved fully towards at-home delivery of all shopping. So now there's a continual background noise of motor scooters here in Seoul. But I look forward to meeting you all during the Garden Cafe meetings, which I guess will be set up next week. So take care and see you soon. Bye.